Dr. Joe DeMarco, chiropractor and owner of OcraMed Health. We're in the office today. We're talking today about femoral acetabular impingement, or what's commonly known as a hip impingement. Now, a hip impingement among athletes is oftentimes the result of repetitive athletic movements. In the gym, a perfect example of this would be repetitive deep squats. A lot of times that is an exercise that can lead to hip impingement. So let's take a look at the hip joint. Now, some athletes are more susceptible to hip impingement than others because of various anatomical variations. We're not going to really get into that today, but some athletes are definitely more susceptible to hip impingement than others. So the hip joint, as many of you know, is what we call a ball and socket joint. The femoral head is the ball. The socket is in the pelvis here is what's known as the acetabulum. Around the rim of the acetabulum, there's cartilage, which is known as the labrum. When you move your hip, the femoral head should be gliding smoothly in that acetabulum so that there's no problems, no friction going on. With repetitive motion, such as like the deep squat, repetition after repetition after repetition, the hip joint can start to get tight in there. It can build up fascial adhesions. The space of the joint can start to close up, get a little tighter. And now as we put the hip through certain motions, the femoral head can start rubbing into and making contact with the rim of the acetabulum, into that labrum, the cartilage of which is the labrum in there. It starts to cause friction, which causes inflammation, which is going to result in pain. So, with a hip impingement, a lot of times the pain is in the front of the hip area, which is the same location that pain would be if you had a hip flexor strain. So it's important, before we get into techniques on how to treat your hip impingement, it's important to differentiate, are you dealing with a hip flexor strain or do you have hip impingement? So that's what we're going to go over first. Okay, so if I'm dealing with a hip flexor strain, there's a couple ways that you can test for this. If I was to stand here and lift my knee off of the ground, to do that, my hip is flexing, my hip flexors are being activated, they're contracting. If I have a hip flexor strain, just lifting this knee up off the ground is going to be uncomfortable. If you're not sure if it is, as you bring it up, now press down on it with your arm and add some resistance to it. If you already have a little bit of discomfort, pushing down against the contracted hip flexor is going to even increase your pain that much more. That's an indication that you've probably strained your hip flexor. The other thing you can do is you can perform what's called a Thomas test. Now, if you lie on your back on a table, if we're testing the right hip flexor, pull the left knee in towards your chest and let the right leg drop off of the table. In this position, you're stretching that hip flexor on the right side, and if it's been strained, this is going to be uncomfortable and it's going to cause pain. Now, if we're dealing with a hip impingement, a good test to see if you're dealing with a hip impingement as opposed to a hip flexor strain is simply standing here, drop down into a deep squat. Now, as you come into this position, your hip flexors are actually in a shortened position. They're more or less relaxed in this position. However, in this position, I'm putting some stress into the hip, the ball and socket joint, the hip joint itself. If this is uncomfortable as I drop into that deep squat position, that's a good indication you're dealing with the hip impingement. And if you are, here's some awesome techniques on how to treat it. All right, so a couple things before we get started. One is, I want you to do before you start the techniques, is I want you to drop into that deep squat and just kind of check your mobility. If you have some pain, be careful. But I want you to just check to see how tight those hips feel, because after we run through the techniques we're going to go over, I want you to, at the end, go back to the deep squat, because I want you to feel the change in mobility and how much looser those hip joints are going to feel. Second off, I've seen a lot of hip impingement techniques where people will come out with like these big heavy exercise bands and strap it into the crease of their hip and run tension in one direction and be pulling on. I mean, I can't think of anything more painful. The band cuts into the crease here where the hips are. no need to run exercise bands into the crease of your hip with all this tension pulling on it. I've seen people do it. They're all black and blue afterwards. I'm gonna show you a much easier and much more gentle technique for treating this hip impingement. Okay, so let's get started. First off, and we're going to kind of go in progression. So we're starting with some easier, more gentle stuff, and we're going to build on it as we go along. I'm going to lay right on your back. I want you to put your heels together, let the knees drop off, and just relax. And then you're going to take your hands and get right into that crease of the hips. And in this position, I just want you to push straight towards that wall and just push down on your hips. And just slowly try to increase the tension and be breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. And you're going to hold this for about 60 seconds. And over that 60 seconds, you're slowly going to try to just continue to increase the pressure. And we're opening up the hip joints here. So we're just going to push down. It actually feels really good on your lower back. You actually get a little traction on the lower back, so it actually feels really good for your back also. But the main thing is we're pushing the hips in this position towards that wall, and we're holding it for 60 seconds. Okay, after we finish that, we're going to say that, and you can do both sides, but I'm going to just focus as if I'm having a hip impingement on my right hip. So after that first technique, we're going to concentrate as if the problem's on the right hip. I'm going to bring my ankle up and over my left knee. And now this time, I'm going to take both my hands. Now with my left hand, I'm going to get it in the crease of my hip along my adductors, and I'm going to be pushing it towards that wall. So I'm going to push this way with this arm, with my left arm, and then with my right hand, I'm going to be on the crease of that hip, and I'm going to push towards that wall. So this arm's going this way, this arm's going that way, and I'm going to really open up that hip joint. Once again, 60 seconds, firm pressure. If you can, just continue to apply more and more pressure as you feel it release. As you hold the pressure, the hip's going to open up. And as you feel it open up, as long as there's no pain, apply more pressure. Once again, I know I'm talking, but if I was doing this, I would just be concentrating on my breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. 60 seconds of pressure with both arms the way I described it. So the left hand is pushing against the adductors against that wall. Right hand is pushing straight. Okay, next. When you get down on the left knee, the right leg, now this is good. First, if you're not used to doing this, I'm up against the wall, so use the wall. Let the left, have the left knee at 90 degrees, but bring the foot out across, just like that. And then with the left hand, I'm going to push, I'm in the crease of the hip again. I'm going to push down to the floor and angle it off towards that wall. So I'm relaxing my leg, so I'm using the wall for support. And I'm just pushing down and towards this back wall here. Once again, 60 seconds. I'm applying continuous pressure. I'm trying to breathe through it, and I'm going to try to increase my pressure as I go. Now, once you get good at this and you feel some good mobility, a more advanced technique for this type of movement is I'm actually not going to use the wall. I'm going to use my right hand's going to be on the floor. I'm going to let my left leg go back. My knees at 90 degrees here. And now I'm going to get a more intense. Now I'm going to take that hand against my adductors way up high near the crease of the hip, and I'm going to push down and towards that wall again this way. So I'm in a relaxed position here, and I'm really going to push down. Now this is a much more intense stretch through that hip joint. It feels awesome. But start with the first technique I just showed you when you're more upright until you have some more mobility. You're feeling looser in the hip. And then you can move on to this technique. So I'm pushing down to the floor, but I'm angling towards that back wall. Once again, it's going to be for 60 seconds. Okay, and then finally, we're going to do one final advanced technique right now. Okay, and this final technique may not be for everyone. If you don't have good mobility rolling onto your back, you may need to work up to it, or you just can skip it and concentrate on the other techniques. But 2 parts, we're going to roll on our back, and then take your hands and put it right into the crease of the hips, and then just let all the weight of your legs come down. Keep the feet up because it adds, don't let them come out this way. Using your feet up like this adds extra weight, so you get more of a release in the hips. And you're just using you're on your elbows basically, and my hands are jammed into the hip, and by just having my legs relaxed down, I'm actually opening up that hip joint. It actually, feels so good. It feels awesome. So I'm going to hold this position for 60 seconds. And like I said, just my feet being above me, the weight of my legs is what's is opening up that hip joint. I have my hands blocking on the joint, letting the legs just press down, opening up the hip joint. And I'm going to hold that for 60 seconds. Now, once again, I'm going to concentrate on that right hip. I'm going to come over this way. Once again, I still have that right hand pressing into the hip joint, but now I'm going to take my left hand against my adductors, and I'm going to push this way. So this arm is pressing towards the ceiling, putting pressure on the hip this way. This hand is going against the adductors and going this way. And now I'm using some gravity, some force from my hands, and I'm just going to let that open up the hip 60 seconds. So I'm basically just on my right shoulder. Like I said, if you're not comfortable or have some mobility issues, obviously this maneuver isn't for you. But for those of you out there that can get into this position comfortably, this is an awesome way to open up the hip joint. All right, there you have it. I hope if you're suffering with some hip pain, hip impingement, I really hope that it heals quickly and you get back into the gym and you don't miss any training. When you have some time, visit my website, www.OcraMedHealth.com. We have 3 different size Tai Chi massage balls are in stock. Hand sanitizer for your gym bag is in. And we have a few of these SRI 2.0s left. When we're talking hips, this thing is awesome. There's 30 different speeds to it. It runs super quiet, and it's just an awesome way to break up fascial adhesions in any area of the body. So visit our website, check that out. If you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe to my channel, OcraMed Health on YouTube. Questions about exercises or injuries, just leave a comment in the comment section below. I do everything I can to get back to everyone who writes in. And don't forget, OcraMed Health is here to keep you fit forever.